What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Next Pats podcast. I'm Phil Perry. We are going to have a rapid fire, bullet point loaded podcast for you today as we prepare here on this Wednesday for the first preseason game of the season for the New England Patriots at Gillette Stadium against the Giants. We'll have a little bit on that. But first, I want to give you a quick offensive progress report. Here on Next Pats, we're always trying to figure out what's next. It's not only with the players, although we like to focus on those guys. It's on the schemes as well. And if you listen to our podcast yesterday, the Patriots Talk podcast with Tom Curran and I, you would hear us both talk about Mac Jones and showing buy-in and some leadership and why that's important. And I agree with all of that. And I have some more on Mac Jones later, but I did want to just give you an update on how things actually looked on the field when it comes to this new look offense. As we've spoken about many times, it looks like one of the foundational pieces of this offense moving forward will be this outside zone running scheme or wide zone running scheme or these stretch runs. You might hear them called all of these different things. They mean essentially the same thing. I thought practice number 11 for the Patriots outside full pads on Tuesday was their best practice as far as that stuff went on the ground, at least. We saw it early in an 11-on-11 scout team period. Damian Harris outside zone. Hey, there's actually some running room there, which was hard to come by even in scout team period. So it's the first team offense going against the third team defense essentially. And it's not as though that third team defense isn't competing, but it's the third team defense. I don't generally weigh those reps as much as I weigh the others because they're really just giving the offense a look. There's a good chance that most of those guys defensively are not going to be in the NFL this year. But then we saw it again later. Outside zone to Ramondre Stevenson. Touchdown in the first 11-on-11 1v1s fully competitive period. Room to run. These runs had been essentially 12 13 car pileups. If you're talking about the number of bodies that had just amassed in the middle of the field as the offensive line is trying to generate some kind of running room, some kind of cutback lane for whether it's Damian Harris or Ramondre Stevenson. Ty Montgomery actually has looked like one of the players most comfortable with this running scheme through 11 practices thus far. Now, maybe that's because he's a little bit lower on the depth chart, and so he's going against lower on the depth chart defenders. But there's been no running room on these plays consistently throughout the course of camp. And when one hits, as it did, I want to say 4 or 5 practices ago, you can hear jubilation from the offensive sidelines. There was one, again, 4 or 5 practices ago. I'm talking about the same play because there have been so few that have actually worked and worked to a reasonably noticeable or significant degree. After that one, that hit, and it was Ty Montgomery, you had Matt Patricia and Mac Jones go over to each other and high five. Clearly, they've been working on it a lot. Clearly, it means a lot to them when it does work. It hasn't worked much. But then we got to Tuesday again. So there's 2 that I mentioned to you. Touchdown run from Ramondre Stevenson. Then again later, Stevenson again, right off the tail of Mike Onwenu, who isn't viewed as a great fit for this type of scheme because it requires so much athleticism from its offensive lineman. He's a big 350-pounder. Think of him as a mover. But it looks like he even reach blocked his man. So he gets across the face, seals his guy off. Really good movement skills there from Onwenu, and a great gain from Ramondre Stevenson. Ty Montgomery, again, with a solid outside zone run later in the same period. So you've got several of those that have finally hit. And I wanted to make mention of that because it did feel like a little bit of a turning point when it comes to the run game side of this new offense. We think that's going to be heavily involved, all this outside zone stuff. Now, they did do more gap scheme stuff and inside zone and duo and these downhill run plays that maybe you're more accustomed to seeing from the New England Patriots as being really staples of their offense. And those plays continue to look pretty good. And those have been pretty consistent throughout the course of camp. It's this wide zone stuff, this outside zone stuff that they're really trying to hammer. And I thought their hard work on that front paid off to a degree, really for the first time on Tuesday. Now, the reason I feel like it is worth bringing that up is not just because of the the success on the ground there and the reasons that would be noteworthy are obvious. But I also want to mention that part of this, whether it's the quote unquote Shanahan style run game you're talking about, or an offshoot of that, which is the McVay scheme, all of these guys have their little different twists on it, whether it's McVay, Shanahan, LaFleur in Green Bay, Stefanski in Cleveland, who learned this under Gary Kubiak, sidekick of Mike Shanahan's for a long time. They all have their different wrinkles, but for all of them, the play action game is really important, and it can be incredibly effective. And it's one of the reasons why this offense is so quarterback friendly. You're cutting the field in half on these boot action plays, so you're sprinting to the end of the line of scrimmage essentially to make that handoff to your running back. If you don't and you keep it, you get to boot in the opposite direction. Hopefully the defense has flowed away from you. You have receivers that are now flowing with you as the quarterback against the grain. And it's 3 levels: short, intermediate, deep, pretty easy to read out. Field is cut in half. You're on the move. Defensive backs are scrambling. Opportunities there for some real chunk gains. We've seen that across the league as this offense has spread. We haven't seen it in New England. So that's the one thing I would say. And again, it's still early. It's August 10th. Haven't yet gotten to the first preseason game. But that would be the next thing I would expect to come as I give you this progress report here. Okay, so you're seeing some progress on the ground with this new stuff. Now the next logical progression would be to see those play action passes develop off of those runs. If you can continue to build those and be successful with those, then all of a sudden your offense gets more explosive. Then all of a sudden you have more opportunities to push the ball down the field when you really couldn't do it last year. And it severely inhibited what you were able to do offensively. Not only have you added personnel that can go deep, Devontae Parker, Tyquan Thornton, but if these concepts can be consistent for you and they can work, you can leverage the abilities of those players to change the look of your offense, not just in terms of concepts, but in terms of explosive ability. Do you have to be a team that hammers people over the head with a running game? Or do you have the ability to truly threaten deep and thereby soften things up underneath and allow that running game to flourish, maybe even more, which is what's amazing about what the Patriots worked with last year. Teams knew they had to run, and the Patriots still had one of the most efficient run games in the NFL. Really difficult for them to pull that off. Okay, so there's your offensive progress report. I want to give you a couple of quotes. One that dropped my jaw from Mac Jones. Here it is. We're going to have John the Skull Crusher Henry slip this in right now.
Yeah, I think we have good offensive linemen, good players up front. And a lot of it's just figuring out the scheme and making sure that there's no free guys. That's the biggest thing for me is as long as there's no one free, I should be able to make the throws like any quarterback can, and I know my offensive line can do that. It's just getting the communication down. It's different than what we've done in the past, so just figuring that out and trying to watch it together and all that. But it is a little frustrating, sometimes, but our offensive line, the actual players and coaches are trying the best they can, and it's practice, and you can't really tell until you get into a game. But I have all the trust in the world in those guys. Like I said, the communication needs to improve, and we did a good job of that today. It's the 2% that we're trying to get to.
Now, he's right about the free runners, and they've seen that in training camp, and it has blown up plays, both in the run and the pass game. You see linebackers come through the line of scrimmage unblocked. Damian Harris stopped 3 yards behind the line of scrimmage. You've seen it in the pass game as well. Free rusher off the edge, free rusher up the gut, twists, stunts. Those have given the offensive line issues at times. But the part of this quote that blew me away is as he's talking about the communication, which is not an unusual thing for any quarterback to talk about when he's talking about his offensive line, he says it's different than what we've done in the past. That doesn't sound like much. That blew me away when I heard that yesterday. And again, this is a new offense. These are new coaches. It's a new scheme. It's essentially leaning on parts of the scheme because you're such a diverse offense. You had everything in there with Tom Brady. You're leaning on parts of the scheme that you had previously, but you're emphasizing them in a different way. It's a new offense. Mac Jones called it a new offense last week. So not only do you have all those balls in the air, but with an offensive line that has 4/5 of its starters back in the system for a third or a fourth or a fifth or more than that season, you're changing how those guys communicate. I understand the tackles flipped. I understand Michael Wenhu's not a bench guy anymore. He's looking like a starter. And I know Cole Strange, is going to start from day one. But why change the way those guys communicated? I understand leaning on different plays because you think it might be easier for the new coaches to call and to teach. You think it might help different pieces on your offense to flourish. For instance, I've said the tight ends should really benefit from what it looks like they're going to offensively here. I think Mac Jones even could benefit. This offense benefits most quarterbacks that it touches. But why mess with the communication on the offensive line? That's something that I'm going to try to dig into a little bit more. I've already spoken to a few people with some theories of their own. One of them is if they're trying to play faster, which is another thing we've heard from this offense, people in this offense over the course of camp, maybe instead of getting to the line and trying to identify pressures, they're going to do what some offenses do, I guess, essentially. Again, these are people who know much more about football than I do, and I'm just trying to relay it onto you, is instead of trying to readjust the protection at the line of scrimmage, they're just going to play. And they're going to throw hot. Sometimes you can adjust the protection to pick up the blitzer and then go through your reads as a quarterback a little differently than if the blitz comes and you have to have a receiver who sees that blitz happen as you do, makes his read, reacts in the proper way, and the quarterback and the receiver have the proper nonverbal communication in real time and make a play to try to hit the defense where it isn't. So there are two different ways to try to deal with defensive scheme, defensive pressures, blitzes. And if they're trying to play faster, maybe they're trying to do less at the line before the snap. Now, that to me wouldn't make a ton of sense because I think one of the advantages you have in Mac Jones is his ability to process, his ability to communicate, his ability to see what he's looking at the line of scrimmage and attack it appropriately. Have the answer to the test. It's just his second year. He was not perfect by any means as far as that stuff goes as a rookie, but that's his superpower. That's the reason he's a first-round pick. He's really accurate with the football as well. I want to take that away from him. But it's the ability to process. And if they're doing less of that, that's something that I would question the logic behind that. And I would love to learn more about it, whether it's Matt Patricia or Bill Belichick, any of those guys explaining to us why that would be the case. Because again, the communication, 4/5 of these guys had the communication down. And in Cole Strange, I think you have a pretty smart human being who would be able to eventually pick it up, if not right away. So changing the plays and the plays that you emphasize, the plays that you make your pillars, maybe even changing the language of the plays, what you call different things, that's one thing. But in terms of the protection and the communication, especially since the offensive line coaches that you have, both Matt Patricia and Billy Yates. Billy Yates was here for several years, playing under Dante Scarnecchia. He knows the Scarnecchia system. Patricia knows the Scarnecchia system. Has that changed? Or just how they communicate at the line of scrimmage? Is that all that's different? Because the communication clearly has been a problem. And it's been surprising to me because you have so many experienced guys up front in front of Mac Jones. But Mac Jones gave us a little clue yesterday as to why that's the case. They've changed the way those guys communicate. So it just added on to the number of changes we've seen this offseason and why I think the learning curve is really steep right now for them. And we've seen it in these practices in the results. Okay, another quote that I wanted to provide to you, and we don't even need the Skull Crusher to drop this one in, but it was a question I asked Mac Jones because last week he said something along the lines of, we're really just trying to get these plays on tape. We're going through things. He didn't call it installation, but it felt like we need to see how these look. And so don't go to the line of scrimmage and just try to win the play. Don't change the play at the line of scrimmage just to beat the defense, to say that you got the W for that play or that day or that period, but run the play because we need to see how it looks. And I asked him if they had moved on from that yet, or if they're allowed to truly compete a little bit more, change some plays. Do whatever you think you need to do to attack the defense. Play it almost in a live sort of way, in a scrimmage sort of way, because we've seen things that look like scrimmages. But my question was, is that what they are? Or is it not until Thursday when you get into a situation where you're given a little bit more freedom? Maybe even on Thursday, they don't have that freedom. I don't know. But what he told me was, at this point, we're doing the same stuff. We're just running these plays and we're trying to figure out what the matchups are and see who can make plays. And he goes into what Bill Belichick has done for the offense and how he's given them a defensive point of view, the same way we've heard players talk about Matt Patricia gives them that point of view, which is helpful for them. But I just wanted to point that out to you as the listeners to say, we are still in the early enough stage of the summer that Mac Jones and the rest of this offense doesn't quite have every tool at their disposal just yet. So we're telling you what we see at practice. And when it doesn't look good at practice, we tell you, as we did on Monday this week. When it looks better at practice on Tuesday, as it did on Tuesday, we'll tell you. But it is important, I think, to point out they're not really permitted to do everything just yet. In the same way, I'm sure the defense isn't. The defense probably isn't allowed to react to certain things that the offense is doing because the defense wants to see certain things on tape. So we're still at that stage of camp, and we'll try to track that as we go and try to let you know, hey, if it starts to look even better for the offense moving forward, is that one of the reasons why? Have they taken the reins off of the quarterback and the rest of the offense to say, go win this play? This is, these are the two that are called in the huddle. You pick one of them. You adjust the routes however you like. You adjust the protection however you like, and let's roll. They're not there yet. And so it'll be interesting to see when that's allowed to happen. Okay, I had a roster projection, 53-man roster on NBCSportsBoston.com. It's on there right now. You guys can go look at that and laugh at it if you so choose. Once you watch this game on Thursday and say, Phil, I can't believe you didn't have Brendan Schooler on there, the special teamer from Texas. Guy's all over the field. He's flying around. He's making plays. He's turning over the football. Maybe all that happens on Thursday night and that projection looks silly, but that's a reason why it might be interesting for you to go back and look at it. I did want to give you 5 players to watch. This is an article that's about to be up on NBCSportsBoston.com, but Raekwon McMillan, does he have a chance to cover Saquon Barkley? It sounds like Barkley's going to play a little bit. He's the more athletic of the two, quote-unquote, top linebackers. Juwan Bentley and McMillan have been the guys. Do we see him run with Barkley at all? Malcolm Butler. How much playing time does he get? He looks like the 3rd or 4th corner on the depth chart. Maybe even lower than that, depending on where you would put Jack Jones and John Jones, who usually is a slot, but has seen some time on the outside. We've seen him just lose foot races to Devontae Parker, who's not a big separator. It hasn't been a great start to Butler, though he has been competitive in red zone situations, like tight quarters situations. But I'm interested to see his speed in a real game situation against a new team. Marcus Jones, he's just fun to watch. If you listen to this podcast, you know why I feel that way. Anthony Jennings, for the Patriots specifically, is if there was an in-house comeback player of the year award, Jennings would be the front runner right now because he's been a terror off the edge at times. He's been used as a rusher between the tackles at times in 3rd down situations. 3rd round pick from a few years ago. It looks like he's finally sort of found his footing. He missed all of last season. So he's somebody worth watching. They have some depth there on the edge that I didn't know they had after Matt Judon and Josh Uche. Dietrich Wise and Henry Anderson, those I think are going to be early down options. But Jennings looks like he might be able to do a little bit of both. Set the edge in the run, rush the passer on 3rd down. Maybe that's a sort of late rookie contract find for Bill Belichick after drafting him again in the 3rd round back in 2020. And LeBron Ray, he's my favorite undrafted rookie so far. A few splash plays already in camp. So there's your 5 to watch. Now, we're going to go through quickly some questions here as well, because I did want to do some mailbag questions. So we will do a couple of those right now. I think we should do mailbag roulette the same way we did last week. And I will have a mailbag. Let's have a pregame mailbag. So on Thursday morning, we'll have a mailbag for you that I think you're really going to enjoy, that will take you into Thursday night's coverage of preseason game number 1, pregame, postgame live, NBC Sports Boston. I'll also be on 98.5 The Sports Hub around 5 o'clock, between 5 and 5:30. So make sure you're listening to there pregame show as well. Let's go with Corey. Corey at the Colors. Corey asks, this is an offensive question. The offense was at its best yesterday when Wynn wasn't in there. If that continues, is he more likely to be cut or traded? I still would say neither is the option there, Corey. I spoke to plenty of people about this offseason with the Patriots, not with the Patriots. It's just hard to find starting caliber tackles. That's still what Wynn is. And he has not been the problem, although he has not been perfect by any means during camp here. He's had a hard time with Josh Uche at times. He has been an issue at times in the team periods, and now he's hurt again, it looks like. We're not sure what he's dealing with, but he's essentially missed the last 2 practices. And the reason I would highlight how hard it is to find guys who can play a little bit is look what happened when he was out. The first time he got replaced, it was by Justin Herron. One of the worst individual practices that I've seen in a long time. Now Yadi Kajust comes in and is serviceable for a day. If that continues, then maybe Wynn does become expendable. Maybe there's a desperate team out there that needs a tackle that's willing to pay the guy $10 million. But as of right now, he is still too talented. Even though I think he's not thrilled to be on the right side, even though he's not anywhere near a dominant force. And I would say he hasn't shown that he's worth what he's about to be paid this year. But I do think he's a starting caliber tackle. He's not a top 20 guy. He's not a top 30 guy. But that's how the league views him. That's how the Patriots view him. And so I think he's here for now. All right. Mailbag roulette. We've got a defensive one here. New Royal Rooters at New Royal Rooters says, how's it looking for Anthony Jennings and Ronnie Perkins, not only getting significant roles, but succeeding in them? All right. So I told you a little bit about Jennings. Who knows about succeeding in a real role? Again, all the caveats we give you when it comes to, well, the offense doesn't look so good, but it's early. The same has to be true on the other end of the spectrum. Jennings has looked really good, but it's early. Can he string these days together? Can he stay healthy? You know, he's somebody who was used as an off-the-ball linebacker and an edge player as a rookie. Really split his time there 50-50. Neither was great. So in the year since then, has he just become so comfortable in that role on the edge that they can ask him to play real snaps? They might have to. But how does that look? I think we'll find out. Maybe not Thursday, although I think he'll play a little bit on Thursday, but in the joint practices against the Panthers and certainly the joint practices against the Raiders. If he's still popping as frequently as he's popping when we're out in Vegas, then I think you could feel pretty comfortable saying you have an NFL caliber player in your hands. Until the last week and a half or so, that was not the case with Jennings. I'm sure I had him on previous 53-man roster projections where he wasn't included. Ronnie Perkins, on the other hand, we're still waiting. Just haven't seen enough from him to really feel good about his spot on this team. Now, he is a third-round pick, more recently than Jennings, 2021 third-round pick. And so I did actually have him on my most recent 53-man roster projection, but it was really based on draft status alone. You know, he's been somebody who's, I think, primarily a backup option in the kicking game. And I think he takes that seriously, which I'm sure they appreciate. But he's not in that core special teams category yet. And he's certainly not in the have to have him out there in a regular rotation on the edge yet kind of player. Matt Judon, for sure, is your guy, I would say, on all 3 downs on the edge. Wise and Anderson have been your early down edge options opposite Matt Judon. Then there's Uche. Then there's Jennings. Now we're 5 deep when we're talking about edge defenders, and we still haven't mentioned Ronnie Perkins. And again, the special teams role just doesn't look like it's there yet for him. So I think that's probably where he's going to have to focus first. He's going to have to beat somebody out. You know, is it Harvey Lange, who has been consistently used on special teams since coming to the Patriots, since coming to the league? Is it Mac Wilson, who looks like a core special teamer potentially for this team? I doubt it. Wilson has looked like the most athletic linebacker that they have, not named Josh Uche. I think that's going to be a huge part of what he does here, is what he does in the kicking game. So Perkins, to me, has a lot of work to do before he gets a significant role on this team and before we can even talk about him succeeding in said significant role. But good question by New Royal Rooters to ask about some of those young linebackers with a little bit of versatility that the Patriots have drafted in the third round over the course of the last couple of years. All right, that'll do it for Mailbag Roulette. Thanks for hanging with me. Some progress reporting when it comes to the Patriots offense, digging into some of the quotes that we got from Mac Jones this week that I thought were interesting. We'll have plenty more for you on Next Pats as we move forward here, but it'll just be a lot of fun to have a game to chew on, even though the expectation for me is that Mac Jones will not play. That could always change. Could always have a late change of heart from the guy who matters most at one Patriot place when it comes to the football operation. That's Bill Belichick. But I wouldn't anticipate we see Mac Jones. Even so, there's going to be plenty for us to look into, to stew on, to talk about on this podcast. So stick with us here on Next Pats. We appreciate you. Make sure you're listening to the Patriots Talk podcast with Tom Curran and myself. And we will have you covered from every single angle known to humankind on all things Patriots. We'll talk to you guys very soon.